There was a scuff that looked out of context on the lower rocker panel.
Why is that suspicious?
Yeah, I recognized it from doing so many shooting reconstruction trainings and having investigated so many shootings. I recognized it as a possible bullet strike.
Did you conduct further examinations of the surface, specifically that scuff?
I did.
Okay. Will you tell the court about that, please?
I conducted a presumptive test that tests for the presence of copper and lead on it.
What's the purpose of that test?
Just to detect any trace copper or any traces of lead that may be present, since those are the main constituents of bullet fabrication.
Did you find any copper?
I did not.
Did you find any lead?
I did.
Now explain that to the judge.
Well, typically, when a bullet strikes an intermediary target, to begin with, the defect on the rocker panel looked atypical, which is to say that it was not a nice, stable bullet in flight when it struck it, or projectile in flight when it struck it. Therefore, reasonably speaking, when a bullet strikes a frangible, abrasive, non-yielding surface, it tends to strip the jacket, the copper jacket, off of the outer layer of the bullet, and that leaves the lead core as a separate projectile.
Did you find another scuff that you examined?
I did. There was one in very close proximity to the first.
Okay, but the results there were negative.
That's correct.
Did you review photographs of the vehicles to ensure the defect was present prior to being transported to the storage facility?
I did.
And did you find the defects there?
I did.
Why would you need to do that?
To ensure that it wasn't something that happened after the fact.
Did you also review footage from the defendant's body camera video?
I did.
What was the purpose of that?
I reviewed the footage so I would have all of the information prior to making any kind of determination. But I also reviewed the footage to see if there were any shots that could reflect the approximate angle that the bullet struck at, or that the bullet strike was located at.
What conclusion did you reach about that?
That the only one that would be reasonably likely to cause that type of defect would have been the last shot that was fired, the fifth one.
Tell the judge what you can tell him about what happens when a high-velocity rifle bullet hits a non-yielding surface such as pavement.
Okay. When that bullet, I like to use a football analogy. As a bullet's in flight, the only way it stays stable is to have a spiraling motion, such as a football. And just as a football's thrown out onto the field, it doesn't take but just the tip of an offensive player's finger or a defensive player's finger to make that into a duck, and to make it start to wobble. And a bullet's the same way. As a bullet strikes any surface, especially a non-yielding surface, it changes the dynamics of its flight, and it makes it gyroscopically unstable. So eventually, if allowed to go far enough, it'll start to tumble.
Okay. So from this, did you conclude that the bullet must have ricocheted off the pavement and struck the undercarriage of the impact?
That would be the best explanation based on the evidence provided, yes.
And you've testified about this in the past.
Yes.
And is it your opinion that your underlying scientific theory is valid in this case?
Yes.
That your technique applying the theory was valid?
Yes.
And that you properly applied the technique on this occasion?
Yes.
That's what it shows.
Cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Morning, Mr. Webb.
Good morning.
My name is Bob Gill. I represent Mr. Oliver. I have a few questions for you also this morning.
Certainly.
When you say you've testified about this in the past,
Yes.
do you mean this particular case, or do you mean the ballistic analysis?
I don't do ballistic analysis. I do shooting reconstruction and bullet pathway determination. However, no, I do not mean this particular case, Mr. Gill.
You testified at the beginning of your examination that you basically had 4 areas of expertise.
I testified that I had rendered expert testimony in those areas, yes.
Okay. And I only got to write down one of them because you were talking faster than I could write. I wrote down ballistic pattern analysis.
Shooting reconstruction, bloodstain pattern analysis, collision reconstruction, and fingerprint examination and identification.
Okay, was I correct in writing down ballistic pattern analysis?
No, sir, I think you must have mixed some terms up.
And basically what your role was to confirm a 5th shot, is that correct?
Not exactly, Mr. Gill. My role was to see if there was any evidence of a 5th shot.
So the Dallas County Sheriff's Office, from your understanding, in their minds, they could confirm 4 shots, is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you look at the vehicle in question?
I did.
Did you agree with their conclusion that it bore 4 separate bullet defects?
I did.
There was 1 shot to the passenger side A post. Do you recall that?
I recall one just in the windshield in front of the A-pillar on the passenger side that exited out the driver's side near the A-pillar.
Do you agree with their conclusion that was a through-and-through shot?
I do.
There was a second defect in the front passenger window.
Yes.
There's another defect in the B-pillar.
I recall that, yes.
And one in the passenger rear door.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
I have a copy of your report in front of me. It indicates you reviewed a crime scene report by the Dallas County Sheriff's Office.
Yes, sir.
Do you have that with you today?
I don't.
You reviewed some crime scene sketches by the Dallas County Sheriff's Office.
Yes, sir.
Do you have those with you today?
No, I'm sorry, I don't.
You reviewed some crime scene photographs by the Dallas County Sheriff's Office.
Yes, sir. I don't have those either.
I guess if I asked you, whatever you reviewed, you don't have with you today. You reviewed some detailed photographs of suspected bullet defect by Dallas County Sheriff's Office.
Yes, sir.
Body cam video of Officer Oliver.
Yes.
Body cam video of Officer Gross.
Yes.
And you also testified also here today that you personally inspected the 2004 Chevy Impala.
Yes.
Is that right? Did you review anything else other than those items we just talked about?
Not that I can recall.
Other than the report that has been furnished to us, did you produce anything else as a result of your work here?
No, sir.
Did you take any photographs?
No.
Did you make any handwritten notes?
No.
Did you have anyone from your company with you at the time you performed this analysis?
I did.
Who was that?
My business partner, William Flores.
Is he also known as Rudy Flores?
He is.
Did Rudy Flores take any photographs?
No.
Did he make any notes?
No.
Mr. Flores is kind of known for being a detail guy, isn't he?
Yes.
Is it unusual for him to not take any photographs or make any notes when doing some crime scene reconstruction work such as this?
Well, it's not unusual in this particular case, especially because we were just going up to take a look at it. We weren't planning on becoming involved in the case at that point.
When did you become involved in the case?
Sometime later, and I can't quote an exact date, Mr. Gill. We were asked to become involved in it sometime later.
So what was your purpose on July the 13th of going up to look at the vehicle?
Just to see whether there was or was not, or whether we could help them find any evidence of any bullet strike that they hadn't already located.
So just a matter of curiosity on your part?
Not necessarily. We've trained many of their people, and we tend to help our former students if they ask for it.
Describe to me what a bullet hole test kit is.
It's essentially a chemical test kit, much the same as a presumptive drug test kit that an officer might use to determine whether a white powder is cocaine or not. This particular case, there's a separate test for lead and a separate test for copper. And if you'd like to know the protocols for the test, I'll be happy to give them to you.
Briefly.
Okay. Essentially, the protocols are you perform the test separately, copper then lead, and excuse me, you place the reagent on a piece of blotter paper or filter paper and press it to the suspected defect for about 30 seconds, or at least 30 seconds, and then take it off and put the second chemical reagent onto the paper, and a color change indicates the presence of copper, and the same for lead.
So there's not much analysis to this. Either the paper turns color or it doesn't.
That's exactly right.
And did you testified earlier that you noticed or suspected two separate defects on the vehicle, is that right?
There were two separate defects that had essentially the same context, yes, in very close proximity to one another.
And they're both located on that passenger side rocker panel?
That's correct.
Did you test both of those areas?
I did.
The presence of those two elements?
I did.
Which element did you test for first?
Copper.
Did you test both of the suspected defects for copper?
Well, Mr. Gill, in all fairness, I tested the first defect completely, copper then lead, then I tested the second defect.
Copper, then lead?
Yes.
And I believe both of the defects were negative for copper?
That's correct.
And the smaller defect was negative for lead also?
That's correct.
But the larger of the two defects was positive for lead?
Yes.
And you know that because the paper turned color?
That's correct.
And this is a presumptive test, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did you take a photograph of the paper?
No.
Did you preserve the paper?
No.
Did you conduct a confirmatory test for the presence of lead?
No.
Was the rocker panel still attached to the vehicle?
It was.
Did you ever receive any training on how to use the bullet hole test kit?
Not formal training. Well, actually, yes, I did.
It probably couldn't have lasted very long, could it?
No.
From viewing, you testified you viewed Officer Oliver's body cam video?
Yes.
At the time Officer Oliver was firing shots, was there any intermediate target between Officer Oliver and the vehicle?
There's always an intermediate target because the ground is always an intermediate target. But if you're asking if there was any upright target or any three-dimensional target above the surface of the ground, then the answer would be no.
So the only intermediate target between Officer Oliver and the vehicle was the ground, is that right?
Yes.
So it's your conclusion that if somewhere along the way the copper jacket had been separated from the rest of the projectile, that would have had to have been done by the roadway, is that correct?
It's the only logical intermediary target that I could see, yes.
Did you ever go back out to the roadway to inspect the roadway to see if there was a defect in that area?
No, sir.
From your inspection, you were able to visualize the other defects on the vehicle, is that right?
Yes.
And they were all up above what we might call the body of the vehicle, is that correct? Well, most of them were anyway.
And I wouldn't necessarily say above the body. Obviously, two of them were in the body. So realistically, the majority of them were above the center line of the vehicle.
And the rocker panel is the lowest section of the, closest to the ground section of the vehicle, is that correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Your Honor, for the purposes of this hearing, we offer the laboratory report, which is State's Exhibit 249.
Any objection for purposes of this hearing?
Not for purposes of this hearing, Judge.
All right, State's 249 is admitted. Anything else?
And the source of your testimony today was primarily from your physical inspection of the car and comparing it to the body cams of the defendant, is that right?
Yes.
That's all I have, Your Honor. That's what.
Go ahead.
Nothing further.
Sir, you may stand down. Your excuse.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Please don't discuss your testimony and please let me know.
Sir.
Judge, we have on occasion, however, asked the DA's office for color photographs of photographs that they've given to us in PDF form. And we have not received, to my knowledge, a color copy of Mr. Webb's report, which will provide it, which would greatly aid our understanding of his testimony.
Okay.
We're going to email to Mr. Gill.
All right, go ahead and do that.
I would say for the record, the photographs that are contained in the report, Your Honor, are crime scene photographs taken by DSO, which were provided to the defense in color.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. I appreciate that. Mr. Webb, go ahead and exit the courtroom. We'll have a seat in this testimony. We'll take these one at a time. Mr. Snipes?
And Judge, could we take up another matter briefly?
Well, let me do this first. I'm going to go right in the order so I don't forget. When you're offering this witness as an expert, do I need to hear any arguments from you about his testimony?
No, sir.
Okay, Mr. Gill?
No, sir.
All right, I'll let him testify about the matters that you outlined this morning. As an expert witness, you can remain in the courtroom, Mr. Snipes, if you wish. Mr. Gill, you had a matter you wanted to
Yeah,
take.
briefly, Judge. Pre-trial, we had some pre-trial motions heard, and among those pre-trial motions was a Brady motion in which we asked that all exculpatory mitigating material in the possession of the state of Texas be turned over to us as soon as they acquire it. And we had an instance during a pre-trial hearing a week ago where we got some Brady information that didn't come to us until the witness was on the witness stand. And we'd like the court to reiterate your earlier ruling ordering the state of Texas to turn that material over to us.
If any Brady material becomes apparent to you, I'll make sure you turn it over. Or if you have it in your possession, I'm sure they will. Is there anything else?
Yes, yesterday, last Thursday morning, we presented to the court and to the state a motion limiting, in which the court granted, in which we asked that the state not go into any 404B material that they provided to us in the presence of the jury until such time as we approached the bench and the court had at least could make a preliminary ruling as to its admissibility.
Yes, sir.
Yesterday afternoon, through the testimony of Officer Chambly, the state went into one of those matters in front of the jury.
Which matter?
That would be the matter of Officer Oliver supposedly, quote, flipping off the vehicle. The state did not approach the bench, did not honor the court's ruling on our motion in limine, and we would ask that the court reiterate its ruling on the motion in limine.
I don't believe that was extraneous conduct. I believe it's part of the HSI at the time. So your request is denied as to that particular piece, and if there's anything It's extraneous, Mr. Snipes, don't get into it until you approach the next part.
The fact of the matter was, we asked the court to limit out anything they gave us notice of by way of 404B notice. That matter was contained in the 404B notice. So the state had noticed that it was the court's ruling that they approach the bench first before they go into it. If that's going to be your ruling, that's going to be that's fine. But it needs to be taken up at the bench outside the presence of the jury to allow the court to make that ruling.
All right, I believe it was part of the race chestnut, so respectfully, I disagree with you on that point. Is there anything else about this particular matter?
No, sir. Is our motion of limine still in effect?
For anything that's extraneous conduct, yes, sir, it is.
The motion of limine was for anything that the state gave us 404B notice of.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is that it doesn't really matter to me what they call their 404B. What matters to me is that particular conduct is part of the race chestnut and it's crime. So I've allowed it and overruled your objection. It's noted for the record. Let's move on. Mr. Sines, call your next witness, please.
George, sir.
State officer, Castro, Your Honor.
Welcome to the record, Mr. Little. Hi, if you would please come to the front of the courtroom. And before you have a seat, please raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
Yes, I do.
Please have a seat. We'll be responding to questions by Mr. Lewis and the blue and silver tie, perhaps also Mr. Bill or Mr. Lane to you. Mr.
Okay.
Lewis, you may proceed with.
Thank you, Your Honor. Morning, Ms. Castro. How are you this morning?
Good, and you?
Doing well, thank you. If you could please state your full name and spell it for the court reporter.
My name is Waleska Castro. That spells WALESKA-CASTRO.
Dr. Castro, how are you currently employed?
I am a trace evidence examiner at the Southwestern Institute of Forensic Sciences, also known as SWIFS, also known as Dallas County Crime Laboratory.
We'll just call it SWIFS, the person of this hearing. How long have you been with SWIFS?
4 years and a half.
And what are your duties with SWIFS?
I am a trace evidence examiner.
And what do you do in that capacity?
As a trace evidence examiner, we're doing analysis on different trace materials that could be found or transferred during a violent crime. Example of these materials could be hairs, fibers, gunshot residue, ignitable liquid residues.
And how long have you been doing that?
Well, I am currently proficient at performing analysis of gunshot residue, and I have been doing that since 2014, and also ignitable liquid residue analysis for a year.
Okay. What did you do prior to joining SWIFS?
I was an instructor at a university. I was a chemistry instructor.
Could you please describe your education and your qualifications for your position and what you do?
I have a bachelor's degree in chemistry and a master's degree in chemistry, both from University of Puerto Rico. I also have a PhD in chemistry from Florida International University. And additional to that, I went through training for the analysis of gunshot residue at SWIFS.
And now you mentioned gunshot residue. What is gunshot residue?
When a firearm is fired, the primer mixture inside the ammunition will initiate an explosion, and this explosion will produce high pressure and hot vapors inside that firearm, and these high pressure and hot vapors will basically push the bullet out of the gun. Once the bullet exits, these vapors will escape through, primarily through any gaps or openings in that firearm, and these vapors are what eventually transform into what is called gunshot residue particles. And these particles will have a specific chemistry and specific morphology, and that's basically what we look for when we perform the analysis.
And you conducted gunshot residue analyses before?
Yes,
On few or many occasions?
I would say many occasions.
And you testified in court as an expert witness in this field
Yes, I have.
on few or many occasions?
Between few and many.
Now, with regard to analysis of gunshot residue, is the underlying scientific theory valid with regard to that analysis?
Can you repeat that question again?
Yes, in the field of gunshot residue analysis, is the underlying scientific theory valid?
Yes,
And is the technique applying that theory valid?
yes.
Now, with regard to this particular case where you asked to conduct a gunshot residue analysis as it pertains to a complainant by the name of Jordan Javon Edwards under SWIFS laboratory number IFS-17-07795.
Yes.
And when did you conduct that analysis? If you need to refer
Look
to
at my
what you
notes,
can.
yes.
Yes, ma'am.
While you're doing that, Mr. Sykes, do you have a copy of 249?
Yes, sir.
So that I can review it, please? That was a report from Mr. Webb. Is this something you intend on introducing in front of the jury?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
May I approach, Judge?
You may, if you also have a copy of Ms. Castro's report, I'll take that too. You don't have it yet, that's fine. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Coach Honor?
You may. Both sides have continuing permission. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Have you had the opportunity to review your report, Ms. Castro?
Yes. So the report date is February 5, 2018.
If you can just explain to the court the process of actually conducting the gunshot residue analysis, just walk the court through that.
So the laboratory receives a gunshot residue kit usually collected from the hands of a person, and in this case we're collected from the hands of the deceased person. And I take the evidence, take inventory, make sure that everything looks fine. I will put that evidence or the sample stubs containing the kit in an equipment or an instrument called scanning electron microscopy with energy dispersive X-ray spectrometer, or SEM-EDS, and I will start an automated analysis that will look at the surface of these sample stubs, and it will detect particles. And once it detects a particle, it will collect an X-ray spectrum that will have a specific chemistry, and the instrument based on that specific chemistry of the X-ray spectrum will assign a classification to that particle. So it does that, and then when it's done, I will go and look at those particles that were classified as gunshot residue and look at them and then confirm those particles. If they were present, I will confirm them and they will be in a report.
In regards to this particular analysis, what evidence was submitted to you so you could conduct this analysis?
The evidence submitted was a gunshot residue evidence collection kit containing sample stubs from Jordan Edwards.
Okay. And the process that you just described, did you perform that with regard to this particular case?
Yes.
Okay. And what were the results of your analysis?
2 particles consistent with primary gunshot residue were confirmed on the sample stub collected from the back of the left hand of Jordan Edwards. These particles consist of the elemental profile, barium, aluminum, are considered to be consistent with primary gunshot residue. However, some environmental sources can produce similar particles. Primary gunshot residue particles were not detected on the sample stub collected from the back of the right hand of Jordan Edwards.
Okay, so gunshot residue particles was found on the left hand but not the right hand, is that correct?
Particles consistent with gunshot residue, 2 particles, yes.
Okay. Now talk to the judge with regard to how gunshot residue particles may end up on someone's hands.
So if gunshot residue particles are found on a kit or the sample stubs collected from a hands or a surface, that means that a person either fired a firearm or the person was in the proximity of the firearm when it was fired, or a person handled a firearm component or any object with gunshot residue.
Is it possible for a gunshot residue to transfer from one person to another? Hypothetically speaking, let me give you an example. You have someone who fired a firearm, came into contact with someone else and transferred particles, is it possible to transfer particles from that person who fired the gun to someone else that person may subsequently touch?
Yes, it is possible.
Now, after your analysis is done, does that go through some kind of certification or review process?
Yes, once I complete the analysis from the instrument and I have reviewed my data and everything before generating a report, the entire packet goes through a technical review process where another analyst with experience in the field or in the actual testing will go through everything and make sure that everything is correct. And once that person signs off, then I can finalize the report and then it will be given a date.
Was that done in this particular analysis?
Yes.
Okay. And was it certified so you could make a report in this case?
It was technically reviewed, yes.
Now, with regard, were you aware that there was a gunshot residue analysis done prior to the one that you done in this case?
Are you talking about the same GSR kit?
Yes.
Yes.
And who was that done by?
It was done by a previous trace evidence examiner, Kara Crosby.
I'm sorry, what's the name?
Kara, K-A-R-A, and the last name C-R-O-S-S-W-Y.
And do you know when her analysis was done?
The report to date says May 19th, 2017.
And you referred to a review process that was done on your case. Did you conduct that review process on this crosswise analysis?
Yes, I did. I technically reviewed her entire packet.
Okay, and what were the results of the analysis that she did?
She found 5 particles consistent with primer gunshot residue and they were confirmed on the sample stub collected from the back of the left hand of Jordan Edwards. These particles consist of the elemental profile barium aluminum and are considered to be consistent with primer gunshot residue. However, some environmental sources can produce similar particles. Primer gunshot residue were not detected on the sample stub collected from the back of the right hand of Jordan Edwards.
Okay, so Ms. Crosswhite found 5 particles and you found 2. Can you explain to the judge why that inconsistency is there?
Well, there are a couple of factors. One of them is like the way the instrument works, the way she put the sample stubs in the instrument is not the exact same orientation that I use for mine, and that's just the way it is. The other part, so my analysis may have looked at some areas that were not looked or were different areas in the stub as hers. And the other reason is that we don't look at the complete entire surface of the sample stub. We will look at an area in the middle, and the reason for that is just to prevent the instrument to going in a neighboring stub and detecting particles from a different stub, potentially from another case. It's just a preventive measure to make sure that we don't get results from stubs or information that it's not related actually to the case. So the orientation and the fact that we don't look at the entire surface of the sample stub could have given a chance for the differences in she found 5 where I found 2.
Does the difference in results mean that there was more gunshot residue there when she conducted her analysis as opposed to when you conducted yours?
I wouldn't know. We didn't test the entire surface of the sample stub. There is no way to determine that.
Let me ask you one more question, Ms. Castro. With regard to the source of your testimony, is what you testified here today from your personal knowledge based upon analysis that you conducted with regard to the test stubs from Jordan Edwards?
What? Repeat
I'm
that?
sorry, that's confusing. Let me rephrase my question. Is the basis of your testimony based upon your personal knowledge and examination that you did in this case?
Yes, and the training, and yes, I am qualified to perform this analysis.
Thank you, Ms. Castro. I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Ms. Castro.
Good morning.
My name's Bob Gill. I'm going to have a couple of questions for you. I guess the first one is you have some paperwork up there with you this morning, right?
Yes, I do.
May I see it, please?
Sure.
Is the paperwork in two separate stacks?
Well, I actually have 3 stacks.
Okay. What's in this stack right here?
Well, these are just references that we go through, and it gives us knowledge on what we do as trace evidence examiner for this analysis.
Okay, so these documents help inform you as to some aspects of your employment, is that right?
It deals mostly with gunshot residue, not everything in my employment duties.
Okay. Well, and gunshot residue analysis testing is part of your employment duties, right?
Correct.
So would you consider these scholarly articles that pertain to gunshot residue testing?
They are references that we use as a background knowledge, yes.
And did you read any of them before your testimony here today?
I review them, yes.
Probably not the first time you've reviewed them, is it?
No.
Do you review them every time you do gunshot residue analysis testing?
Not for the testing, but for the testimony as preparation.
Okay, very good. So what's in this stack right here?
So this is the actual analysis packet for the gunshot residue analysis performed by Ms. Crosby. And this is the analysis packet for my analysis.
Okay. And these look like pretty fresh packets. Did you print these off this morning?
No, I had them printed out maybe last week in preparation.
When you say you did a technical review of Ms. Crossway's work, what did that review consist of?
It reviews, the technical review consists of looking at different aspects in the technical level and an administrative level. And that form that you're looking right now, it's the form that I signed, certifying that I have reviewed the different aspects written down in that form.
Did you review her data?
Yes, I did.
Did you review photographs of any photographs that she took through her scanning electron microscope during the course of the examination?
There are images, and yes, they were reviewed.
Did you review those images in color or in black and white?
They are grayscale images. They are not colored.
Does the device, the scanning electron microscope, produce color or grayscale images?
Grayscale image. The detection of these analysis is based on the brightness and darkness contrast. Anything bright or with the gray kind of threshold will be detected, and anything that is dark, like black, it's not going to be detected. But it's not colored at all.
Okay, so within this report, as I'm looking at an image, is that a pretty accurate image of what you see through the scanning electron microscope?
Yes.
Did you concur in her results, in her findings?
Yes, if I wouldn't agree with her findings, I would have, part of the technical review process will involve discussing any discrepancies, and the analyst will have corrected those. And once that's done, then it would have been signed off. There wouldn't be a report if I wouldn't agree with what she presented to me.
And do you recall if she had to go back and change any of her original report?
No, that would have, if there was a corrected report, it would be included in her packet.
So when she submitted her report and her findings to you, you agreed with them? Is that right?
Yes. This is mine, if you want to look at it.
I might want to take a look at it. Who did the technical review on your report?
It was my supervisor, David Spence.
And Mr. Spence agreed with your findings here?
Yes, otherwise there wouldn't be a report.
So you found elements that were consistent with gunshot residue, is that correct?
I found particles that are consistent with gunshot residue.
But you didn't find anything that was characteristic of gunshot residue, did you?
No. And there is a difference between those.
That's why those two terms are used, right?
Correct.
They're not interchangeable, are they?
No.
Did you have occasion to examine any firearms themselves in connection with this case?
That would be for the firearms unit. I don't perform firearms examination.
Okay, so you didn't examine a firearm.
No.
Did you examine any clothing?
It wasn't submitted to the laboratory, no.
Okay, so no, you didn't examine any clothing?
No.
Did you yourself take an SEM stub and try to recover gunshot residue from anything?
No. I didn't collect residues from any surface to see if there is gunshot residue or not.
So your examination here was basically to retest some SEM stubs that had been submitted to your laboratory, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so here's an email on August the 8th asking you to, I guess, it was to be present in court last Tuesday?
Correct, for the pre-admission.
Okay. And that was the first time you were asked to be in court?
For this case, yes.
How many times have you testified as a witness?
I don't count them, but I will guess maybe 30 or 40 times in Dallas County and out of Dallas County and even out of state.
And here's some notes you made about a meeting with Mr. Snipes, Mr. Lewis, and Investigator Garrison, is that right?
Correct. We are required to do records of communication. That's okay.
What is the relationship between SWIFS and the Dallas County Medical Examiner's Office?
We are in the same building and we are part of SWIFS, but the medical examiner's office, it's basically in charge of doing autopsies. And whenever they collect evidence from a deceased person, usually they submit to the laboratory section, but they are kind of a different section inside the building.
So when evidence is transferred from the Dallas County Medical Examiner's office to your office for testing, you go through a formal chain of custody procedure, is that right?
Correct. They typically submit to the evidence registration unit, and the evidence registration takes care of looking at what is being requested and creates what is called a service request, and then that triggers the laboratory to go and look, oh, there is this type of evidence, we need this type of analysis, and the laboratory takes care of the rest.
And all of those service requests are all compiled under a unique number, is that right, for a particular case?
Yes.
Did you participate in investigation of any other service request in this case?
No. Just the gunshot residue analysis.
Which was request number what?
0022.
Pass the witness.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Very good. And you may stand down. Thank you very much.
Judge, the purposes of this hearing, the statement offers states that number 246, which is a copy of this crosswise GSR analysis test report, and 247, which is a copy of Ms. Castro's GSR analysis test report.
All right, for purposes of this hearing, Mr. Gill, do you have any objections?
No, Your Honor.
Both of those exhibits are admitted for purposes of this hearing. You're submitting her as an expert?
Yes, Your Honor.
Very good. Mr. Gill, what says the defense on that particular issue?
We don't have anything to say, Judge.
Thank you very much. Will be taken by this court as an expert witness in the area of gunshot residue. Who will your next witness be, Mr. Gill?
State calls Heather Francis.
Let's take a very brief, maybe 5-minute recess as she's coming up. And we'll take that matter up here in just 5 minutes. Court's in recess. Here's your exhibit, Mr. Stein, 49.